So I am at the moment, I'm a trauma-informed recovery specialist, like yourself with the Chrysalis Effect. But I began my career as a nurse way back in 1986, 87, I think it was, and really struggled. I actually had to leave nursing eventually after the birth of my first child. But when I started nursing, it was one of the phases of crisis that we seem to be constantly going through. So it was the time when trusts were being created and sort of the NHS was breaking up into parts that were competing and training was changing. So we were moving from being part of the team to supposedly being supernumerary, and lots and lots of stuff going on. So it was a really difficult time, I think, to become a nurse. And I initially worked in acute care of the elderly, which was, I enjoyed it, but it was really crazy. It was totally full on all the time. And I used to go home at the end of a late shift, about 11 o'clock, knowing that I'd got to be up again at 5:30. So I absolutely had to sleep. And I'd spend the whole night being woken up, hearing voices of patients who were shouting for commodes. So I was never, ever switched off. And it was utterly, utterly exhausting. And I moved into community nursing, partly because that fitted what I wanted to do as a nurse. So I was always interested in holistic care, and it was really important to me to spend time with people, get to know them. Yeah. But also, I think part of an escape from that ward environment, which I really struggled with, and trying to find a place where I fitted in nursing. And it was, again, a really high pressure environment. I was working in Leith near Edinburgh, which is a docks area, so high levels of poverty and all that goes with that.
Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, so it's an area of high poverty, all the things that go with that. So lots and lots of domestic violence and drugs, prostitution, and then, of course, all the child protection stuff around it, just at the time when I was becoming a mum. And I just could not put the two together. So leaving my child with somebody else while I was going to look after these others, and feeling enormous responsibility because we didn't have enough staff, that if anything went wrong, if I dropped a ball, then one of these children could die. And I think that's a very common feeling across nursing, is that sense of I've got to be perfect. I've got to do this well every day because it's life or death. And eventually, I just couldn't do that anymore. I had my manager call me in and say, we're going to make you responsible for the whole caseload because the health visitors are all gone on long-term sick. And I was left as a part-time staff nurse trying to deal with all this on my own with peripatetic health visitors. And of course, you know anything about health visiting, it's not something that you can just come in for one day and do and then go away again.
Yeah.
So having said I can't do that, legally I'm not allowed to take on the caseload. I'm not a health visitor. And I was told, well, tough, we're doing it anyway. I literally went back to my desk and my head hit the desk and the shutters came down and I crashed completely. So that was my first big crash. And I didn't come back into nursing from that because I think what I realised, I was diagnosed with postnatal depression, but that I could not fix that situation on my own. And I was banging my head on a brick wall, just trying to keep it going. And so what I did was I sort of came back into nursing, but I came back to where I trained, which was the University of Edinburgh, to do a PhD.
Right.
And I wanted to study why nurses were leaving, because at the same time, all of this was made so much worse because all the headlines were about nurses are quitters and they're losing their sense of commitment. And, this is why there are not enough staff. And that just wasn't my experience. And I was thinking, we've got incredible commitment, and quitting is just such a pejorative word. So I wanted to look really through my research at what was happening for nurses. And I struggled to find people who had actually left. And as my studies went on, what I began to realize was the issue was not that nurses are leaving, but that they're staying. And I was interviewing people and trying to find out why was it when they talked so much about leaving and how hard it was that they just kept going. And there was this really powerful sense of being trapped. So my own feeling was sort of replicated there. If I'm a nurse, this is my identity. This is so much who I am. And I have a vocation, but I'm not able to fulfill it in the setting that I'm working in, but
Yeah.
I have to keep going no matter what, because if I stop, something awful is going to happen. Going back to that, somebody's going to die.
Yeah.
But also, if I don't keep up with every shift, doing all the things I'm supposed to do on my to-do list, I'm leaving stuff for my colleagues, so they're on the back foot when they start as well. And this awful situation of being sort of pushed and pulled all the time. And actually, I call my thesis, "Should I stay or should I go?" to sort of capture that feeling.
Yeah.
And it gradually developing into almost a physical feeling of being torn. You've got to put your foot on the accelerator and the brake at the same time, and realizing that my body and my mind were beginning to fail, and that at some point it was going to go wrong.
Yeah.
And what I heard again and again from the people I interviewed was, "This is my registration on the line as well." And so for those few who did leave, it wasn't the quitters and it wasn't the people who lacked commitment. It was the people who finally came to see, by carrying on, I'm actually doing a disservice to myself and my colleagues and my patients.
Yes.
And taking themselves out of it. But they really were a very small number.
Yeah.
And even those few, I had the experience of interviewing somebody, and while we were talking, the front door went and the postman had brought her a copy of the Nursing Times, and she said, "Well, I'm doing a few bank shifts, just to keep my registration in." And you're thinking, you said you'd left, but you still got that hook back into it, which is really interesting. Cut a long story short, teeth in back to front today. Long story short, I finished my PhD while I was living in South Africa, because I had to follow my husband's work because there was so little money available. And at the end of it, my head of department said, "Well, there isn't a future in this for you, because nursing research is about patients, not about nurses." And trying to get stuff published, it was the same message. It's about patients, not the nurses.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was another big blow. And that was when I came off the register and began grieving, I suppose, having left nursing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was away for 15 years, I think. So I became the carer for elderly parents. I was raising my children, but I still had all of this drive underneath that I'd come through nursing with, of I have to do this perfectly. I have to keep on top of it. This is my kids, my parents. I've got to make sure that my parents, when they're ill, have all the care that I would want for myself. And I think that was a line that was often used in nursing. You treat each patient as if they were your parent. So then when your parents are patients and you're trying to battle through the system to make sure they get what they need, it's even worse. And I ended up crashing again physically this time. So I had lots and lots of symptoms and I ignored them for years. And I thought, yeah, I'm the super nurse. I can do this. I've come this far. It'll be fine. Until my body just said no. And I crashed after my father died, actually. And I literally, I couldn't walk sometimes. I was so exhausted. I had to give up the job that I was doing at that time because my brain fog was so bad. I couldn't remember names. And that was something I'd really prided myself on as a nurse. You have to know everybody's name. So when I started, the matron would come on the rounds, because that's how long ago it was. And you had to have at your fingertips the name and the diagnosis and the history and the family. Even if you just come back from holiday. I remember being told off once because I said, "I'm sorry, I don't know. I've just come back on." And it's just like, well, what's that got to do with it? So when those names go, I can't do that anymore. I'm missing appointments. It was just horrific. And I suddenly find that instead of being a superhero with the cape who can cope with anything, I'm stuck at home on the sofa and I am completely dependent and I can't earn anything. I'm watching my kids grow up. I can't go out and do the things with them that I want to. And I think when you're a carer, it's bad enough for everybody when that happens. But I think when you have that professional identity, it's even worse. And also a sense from doctors and other people, sometimes explicitly, that you're not allowed to be ill. You're a nurse. What the heck are you doing here? Pull yourself together. Which was really, really hard. And I found the Chrysalis Effect. So I recovered through the Chrysalis Effect, long story short, and I am now trained to work with them. And it feels like I've done a complete circle. So from that point where I'm desperate to be a nurse at any cost, and then grieving having had to leave it, I've found a way back. And I think, crikey, I'm actually doing now what I was trained to do. So I'm using that nursing knowledge and experience and communication skills to sort of, I suppose I would say, walking alongside people through their illness to help them find a way back to health or to manage what they're dealing with. And I'm doing that through wellbeing coaching, which is fabulous.
Yes.
So I suppose today what I'd like to talk about is one of the tools that we use in the Chrysalis Effect, which is the phases of recovery. So that for anybody who's listening, I know it can feel like you're the only person and you're told we don't understand this disease, you know, there is no plan, and you can feel really alone.
Yeah.
But there is a pathway, and the Chrysalis has been working for 15 years. So this is based on all of that experience of what other people have been through. And so by going through those 6 phases, I hope that people will be able to locate where they are and to have a sense that with the right help and support, you can move forward from wherever you are to phase 6, which is where I am, which is the full recovery. Yeah. That holy grail that I thought was never actually ever going to happen.
I always love it when we actually are able to explain this, and people, it's such an eye opener, isn't it? And to see that it is actually kind of a pattern to it as well. We so often see this coming back over and over again, in that it's almost like a specific profile for people to crash. And within nursing, we see that a lot as well, don't we? And to see that it is absolutely possible to recover. But also prevention and intercepting.
Yes. And hopefully, you know, people, if they can recognize it early enough, will then be able to find that support and the answers to make sure that they don't go through what we've been through, which is phase 2 of the crash, which is really scary. I know for a lot of people, it's something you don't even want to think about. It's just too frightening. But to know that there is a way to avoid that, or if you are there, to come out the other side and be okay, and actually fulfill that need, that deep value of service and care for other people without hurting yourself.
With the compassion and kindness that we came into the role with, to keep that going, but with compassion and kindness towards ourselves as well.
Yes, and I think that's often what's missing, isn't it? Is we look at, there's a sort of a dichotomy. There's the nurse who's strong and looks after people, and there's the patients, and we do things to and for them, and forget that we're human. And I think when you forget that sense of humanity, that's when it goes wrong. And that's when we see people at work who burn out and become completely, apparently oblivious to anybody else's pain, and can do awful things sometimes. I think we need to be honest about that. Burnout sometimes can lead to really awful behaviour. So so I wanted to share my screen with you for a minute, just to show these 6 phases of recovery that we use.
If you can't see this properly now on the Facebook page, then don't worry, we will post this afterwards as well, so you can refer to it with what we're talking about just now.
Sure. Right. And there's a couple of pictures of me in there because I want to draw on some of my experiences as well as what I've learned from working with other people. So on the top left, you'll see me there a long time ago in my nurse's uniform with my silly little piece of paper on my head called a hat, before I crashed. But by that point, I was already really struggling physically as well as emotionally. And then by the end of this pathway, this purple pathway, this is me again, actually this summer in a friend's kayak. So having gone through a crash in which at times I was taken into hospital by ambulance with cardiac symptoms, completely unable to even get up and walk to the toilet because my heart would just go into overdrive, and I had atrial fibrillation, to being out to get out on the lochs in Scotland where I live now, and row, which is one of the most demanding physical aerobic exercises. So starting off there, the way we break this down is the first phase of going through these illnesses and to recovery is denial. And this is some of what I've talked about of those early days when I was nursing, when you push aside the early warning symptoms and you try to pretend that everything's okay and that you can cope and you've got your superhero cape on, and because you've coped before, you will be able to again. And you just push through. And I can see now that I had quite a lot of sore throats, particularly very early on, and I'd had that since childhood. I mean, that's another aspect of this, is the influence of childhood on the development of illnesses. But focusing on this now, I had digestive disturbances, so bloating. Some people get IBS. That awful feeling of weakness in your knees, or waking up sometimes and thinking, I'm not sure that my body's going to obey me today and let me get up. And it being a real push to even get your legs over the side of the bed. But once you do, you're up and you're off and you're working again. And you just keep pushing through and finding excuses for why you're tired. So I used to say, well, I'm a nurse and I've got a small baby. Of course I'm tired.
Supposed to be.
And that denial allowed me to miss the fact that actually I was so severely anemic because of my hormonal menstrual problems that were all part of this. I actually should have had a blood transfusion. But I was going, yes, it's all right, I'm a nurse. That's how I'm supposed to feel. And in order to cope with those awful emotional as well as the physical feelings, there's a whole range of things that we as nurses and other people do in order to soothe it and to be able to push away that rising sense of panic of what's going to happen when I can't do this anymore. So things that are often seen as addictive behaviours are a mechanism, they're a soothing mechanism. So things like smoking, nurses have high levels of smoking and drinking. Comfort eating, and you think how much chocolate there always is on the wards, and you reach out for one which gives you that just little boost to keep going, and then you're not hungry when it gets to a meal, even if you've got time for a meal. We get sort of compulsive spending problems as well. We see that a lot at the Chrysalis Effect. So people who have started a craft thinking, oh, I need to do something for myself, and then they'll spend huge amounts of money on that new hobby and get into difficulties over it. Or we might use exercise compulsively. So I found it difficult to imagine how people would do this, but some people will come off a shift and go to the gym because driving their body helps them to push away the emotional feelings that are there. And of course, that all adds onto the load that you're putting on your whole system. I think the other thing that's important in this phase of denial is actually a trauma response. I know we're not talking in detail about trauma today, but it's really important that our bodies are designed, if that fight and flight run mechanism is not going to deal with the problem, then we will go into a freeze. And that's designed as an animal so that if the predator is coming for you, you would hope, first of all, that it doesn't see you and goes by. But if it does, that it's not going to hurt so much when it eats you. And I think that does translate sometimes into that nursing sense of, I just have to freeze so that I can't feel this because it's just too painful to survive. And what happens is not just, I suppose it's a division between the mind and the body, which shouldn't be divided. They're not separate things. But in order to protect you, your mind will withdraw from your body. And it numbs you and it numbs your emotions. But it also means that you lose touch with what's happening in your body. And that links into a lot of symptoms. So I think in our nurse training, you usually taught about this weird little homunculus man, this sort of distorted figure that's on the brain, which is the brain's representation of your body. So you have huge hands in this homunculus because you have so many nerve endings in your fingers. But what happens when you're dissociating in a chronic way, in the way that we do, because we've got that trauma all day, every day, is that mapping out of your body and your mind begins to break down. And what I found was that I was dropping things a lot, fumbling, or my grip wasn't very good, or I got pins and needles, because my mind just didn't know where my hands were anymore. And it couldn't interpret the signals. It couldn't tell the difference between pain and pressure. And the same applied to the whole of my body. So I would walk into door jams or trip over because I didn't know where I was in relation to them. And at one point later when I was ill, I was sent to a neurologist and she did a pinprick test on me. And I couldn't feel a pin anywhere on my body apart from a narrow band around my middle. And I realized then just how separated my mind and my body had become.
Yeah.
And so I was getting pains all over my body. I had fibromyalgia, and that was the root of it. So there was no injury, and the doctors kept saying there is nothing physically wrong with you. And the sort of the go away, leave us alone kind of attitude. But there was something wrong, is that my wiring was wrong.
Yeah.
And if somebody touched me, I didn't know if it was pain or pressure. And so my brain would say, oh, pain.
Wow.
It wasn't until fairly recently, actually, that I realized just how disconnected I'd been, physically and emotionally, when I recovered and realized, what was I supposed to be like?
Yeah.
So that's all part of that denial and what helps you to keep going. Until that point I described, where your body says no more and you move into phase 2, which is the crash, which is seriously scary. And literally, I could not carry on functioning. I wanted to. I felt that push, that drive to keep doing all the time, but I just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And so you've got even more of that horrible feeling of being trapped, and the sense of, well, I need to earn. I need to look after my children. You can't go back to bed. And I became completely dependent on my husband. And it went up and down. I had a series of crashes, but at my worst, as I said, I couldn't walk to the toilet, and I found myself as a patient in resus in QMC in Nottingham.
Right.
Being looked after by a former matron who'd actually given up her matron's role to go and work on A&E, so that she could be with the patients. So she was doing exactly what I had done in those early stages.
Yeah.
And she was fabulous, but it was terrifying. And I remember lying there and feeling the symptoms change and thinking, oh my goodness, I'm in atrial fibrillation. This might be the end. Am I having a heart attack or something? I better shout somebody.
Yeah.
And the little nurse voice went, yeah, don't bother them. You'll be a nuisance. And then another voice, because I'd been with the Chrysalis Effect long enough, said to me, for goodness sakes, if you don't make a nuisance of yourself now, you're not going to ever be able to make yourself a nuisance again.
Yeah.
So I shouted, and they came, and I was fine. But that was a real wake-up call to realize just how far that looking after others, not myself, could take me.
Yeah.
And so I really seriously had to work on getting better. And thank God I'd found the Chrysalis Effect, and I got this pathway. I got people who could explain what had gone wrong and what I needed to do. And that happens just to so many people. So I'm hoping that by talking today, if there is anybody who is heading in that direction, we'll be able to reach out for that help and avoid this. And if you are in crash, to let you know that it's possible to come out of the other side, even though you'll be told by the doctors and the NHS that there is no cure, there's no way forward, you have to adapt. It's not true. And I think Femke and I being here are kind of proof of that. That you can come out the other side. So phase 3, when the doctors had done all of their tests and told me that everything was fine, and it was usually they would put it in terms of, oh, good news, you haven't got MS or rheumatoid arthritis or one of these other things that they were looking for, as if I'd be thrilled. And I just got more and more desperate, as there were no answers. And I knew as a nurse, because of my training, that there were physiological reasons and that my symptoms were real. But they wouldn't look at anything other than individual symptoms. They were seeing me as bits of body. And I kept asking why, because that's what I was trained to do as a nurse. And I would say, no, I know my hormones are involved in this, because I've got all this really intense bleeding and all the rest of it. I could put it together to some extent and say, well, why won't you send me to a hormone specialist? And no, that's got nothing to do with it. Adrenal fatigue doesn't exist. And I would think, well, I can have cardiac failure, I can have liver failure, I can have kidney failure when they're all put under too much strain. Why is it the adrenals are the only part of your body which, when they are pushed too hard for too long, as they are when you're in chronic stress, why wouldn't they fail? But this was this absolutely no. You have to pull yourself together and learn how to live with this. In fact, my GP said, you just have to realise that middle-aged women ache. And I lost the plot with her, because she was a middle-aged woman as well. And I just said to her, Of course we do. And that's not because we're middle-aged, it's because we do too much and people expect too much. That doesn't mean I should just go home and put up with it.
Yeah, it's not
And that
normal,
fire,
really.
oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, it is normal. It's normal. There are lots and lots and lots of middle-aged women who ache. That doesn't
Yeah,
mean
of
that we
course,
can't
but
do
it's
something about it.
normalized. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's really interesting, actually, because there's a book I'm reading at the moment by Gabor Mate called The Myth of Normal. And he starts off talking about that, saying just because it's normal doesn't mean that it's good and that we can't do something about it. Anyway, yeah. So at that point, I was in phase 3 and I was desperately looking for an external cause of why I was ill so that I could find a cure and get back to my life.
Yeah.
And that gives me chills now, the idea of going back to the life that had made me ill. But that's very often what people say. I need to get back.
Yeah.
I'm needed. When actually they don't realize that moving forward, you get to something so much better. So going backwards is not a great idea. When I ran out of doctors to give me any answers, I moved over, as so many people did, to trying to find alternative therapies. So, you know, I went to a chiropractor, I did kinesiology, I went to a herbalist once. And that's a pattern we see a lot as well, is that you're so desperate and in such a rush to get better.
Yeah.
You might try somebody, but you don't give them long enough to actually make a difference.
Yeah.
So I only went to a herbalist once and then moved on to the next thing. And it costs a fortune. And all the time you're not earning and the money's draining away. And you get more and more and more desperate. But what we see in the Chrysalis Effect is when people actually come to us and learn why they're ill and what's going on, they gradually become to realize that it's not actually an external thing that's made you ill. So I think long COVID is a really good example of this.
Yeah.
Is that people talk to me about, I caught long COVID. Well, you can't catch long COVID. You catch COVID, and long COVID is what happens afterwards to some people. And what will inevitably have happened before the long COVID is this long period in which you have driven your mind and your body to the limit.
Yeah.
And that COVID virus has been the straw, the final straw that tips your entire system over into a whole cascade of reactions that produce symptoms that the doctors will tell you are not connected, but they are all part of the same collapse of your system, really. You lose that homeostasis. And when you understand that, you know, it wasn't the COVID who gave you long COVID, it's all the things that you were doing before that made this happen. It's not about self-blame, although I think we all feel that. What have I done? But it gives you an opportunity to change it. And that's where the real big shifts come in health and your energy beginning to come back. Is recognizing, okay, I did far too much. I didn't look after myself. You know, I didn't eat well. I didn't rest. I've forgotten what fun's like. And I need to bring that all back and make that part of my life again. But you've also got to get past what the drivers were. So you can't do that on your own with just willpower of saying, okay, I'm going to follow the RCN advice and I'm going to meditate every day. And it doesn't work because there's a reason why you're keeping busy all the time. And it's one of those soothing mechanisms. So you have to understand the drivers. Why do I feel this need to fix other people? Why do I feel the need to fill every minute with something? And that's where yourself, Femke, and me and our colleagues come in, helping people to unpick that and to learn new habits. It sometimes involves trauma therapy, which is something I went through, which was hugely helpful. And gradually you begin to see your energy pick up and your symptoms decline and you begin to be able to sleep again, which is brilliant. And that's all phase 4. And you get to the point where you think, I'm just going to do whatever it takes. Even if some of the things you know you've got to do are actually quite scary. And you move gradually into phase 5, which is what we call relearning and relapse. I realise I'm still sharing this. I don't know whether you want me to turn the screen share off.
No, that's fine. I think
okay.
I'm just looking at my phone. You can actually see it. I'm just looking if there are any questions as well, but I don't think at the moment there are any.
Quick step of water.
So yeah, carry on.
Hydrating yourself, that's something I learned. I used to go through a whole shift and not drink anything or go to the loo. I've learned not to do that. Yeah, so phase 5, relearning and relapse. And in some ways, I think this is the worst. So a few clients now going through this, where their energy begins to come back. They begin to think, yay, it's possible, I'm going to be all right. And the instinct is to use that energy. And so you fling yourself back into life and you end up crashing again. And you think it's the end of the world. It's all been a waste of time. But actually, it's a learning process. And each time you crash, it's never as bad as it was before, or rarely as bad as it was before. And you now have the tools to be able to do something about it. And you can look at what you've done and think, okay, I'm going to learn from that the next time. And through phase 5, it's a sort of, recovery is never a straight trajectory. You're sort of going up and down and up and down, and each down is awful, but you learn something and the trajectory is generally up. Until those relapses, rather than crashes, I think, they get further and further apart, and they get less and less until you reach where we are, which is phase 6, is full recovery. And we define that as being when you've had a whole 12 months without symptoms. People quite often say to me, how do you know that it's not just a long gap between relapses? And the big difference is I now have made self-care and prioritizing my own well-being the first priority in my life. And I'm no longer having to try and jump on and off the bandwagon to make myself do all the things that I need to do. It's just become an integral way of how I live my life. And it really does take time to do that, to let it really embed. So I will start each day thinking, what do I need today to make today not even, not just bearable as it would be in the past, but to be a lovely day. And so I might be doing awful things. If I've got a really tough day ahead, I'll think, okay, what am I going to do as well to make sure that there is part of this day that's good and that looks after me? And I also know those symptoms that I have that indicate that I'm pushing it a bit too far, and we all do. But I will pick up on them and I will do something about it. So I know I'm not going to crash because I can do that. And I know I'm not going to crash because I have gone from not being able to even walk to the toilet to being able to climb in the hills in Scotland. So I've moved back to Scotland and I'm hill walking. I participated fully in the move. So I was dealing with, carrying boxes up and down stairs and dealing with lawyers and all that stress. And I didn't crash because I looked after myself through it. So I now know that I've got that confidence that the new life that I've got, where I'm able to use all that nursing experience with what I've learned through my illness, is going to carry on. And that's not to say I won't get ill again. I've had COVID, people still get ill after they've had fibromyalgia and recovered. But I know how to look after myself so that I don't crash from things again.
Yeah. Wonderful. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that, Alison. It just gives a really good insight on how it responds to the nursing world, and how we can have had this lived experience. And
and that it's okay to let go of that hero cape and be human, and actually acknowledging that human and vulnerable makes you a better nurse. So if you choose to go back into nursing, you'll be a better nurse and you'll be able to have the boundaries and know how to look after yourself to do it.
This is it, yes.
But you'll also have all of those options, and that's something I see now is nurses don't see what skills they've got, what possibilities there are to use your nursing skills in so many other areas, and have a really fulfilling career.
What I always find fascinating as well when people have recovered, that they see their illness as a blessing, really, because it made them see what was going on in their lives and where they could make those positive changes and create a life that they love. So
and if you told me that, as people did when I was really ill, you're going to look at this as a gift one day, I'd probably want to punch them.
Right.
It absolutely is, because it takes that crash to make you realize just what it is, that how important your health is.
Absolutely.
And to really value it enough.
Absolutely.
I'm hoping by talking about this, we can help people before they get to that crash to realize
we want to be more on that, the preventative. And so within nursing today, we want to bring that well-being to the workplace, and start creating that awareness. And once you have that awareness, there are things we can do.
But not just do it because you can look after other people better. And that's what I see again on the RCN website. Look after yourself because you can't look after anybody else if you don't. But you look after yourself because you're a human being and you are precious and special in your own right.
It's like, again, kind of focusing on, if you don't look after yourself, you can't do anything for your patients. So again, it's about the patient, isn't it? You can do something for your patient because you're not. But it is, bring it back to you. This is about you and your health and well-being, and you're so worthy.
And then as a full human being in touch with the vulnerability, you are able then to offer that to others in service in ways that you choose and that you know will protect you. So.
Exactly. I'm having a quick look to see if there's any comments. Nothing at the minute. Please, people, if you are watching this now, or are you watching in replay, just let us know. Replay and ask us any questions. We'll have a look back in every now and then over the course of the next few days. And if you have any questions, we'll
do get in touch, because we are very happy. I think we both do a half-hour free discovery call, don't we? So people can talk to us and talk about how we can help. So don't sit out there on your own feeling trapped.
This is it. You're not alone in this. And also, just to quickly let you know, because I realize we're about 40 minutes in again, this topic just is one where we can talk about it for a long time. But it just opens up the discussion, and so feel free to comment and get in touch. Also, Alison and I are looking to further this discussion, creating a webinar where we just want to have your input. You can have more kind of discussion around this. So we are looking to put that together just now, but we need to let you know when this is happening. So keep your eyes peeled for that.
Let us know if you're interested, so we can get back to you once we've got something.
This is it. Yes, get in touch, DM me, and let me know if you're interested in something like that. All right, so I'm gonna have to leave it at this. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's been lovely.
And hopefully speak to you again soon. All right. See you soon. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.